You can hear me now?
Yep.
All right. Good morning and welcome to the 8th session of the Ballot Simplification Committee, meeting to prepare an overview of ballot measures for the voter information pamphlet and the November 3rd ballot. My name is Betty Packard and I was nominated for this committee by the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. Michelle Anderson was nominated by the Pacific Media Workers Guild. Laura Girardin was nominated by the League of Women Voters, and Scott Patterson was nominated by the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. Our clerk is Peter Stevens, and our attorneys are Jenica Maldonado and Andrew Shin. Because we are operating from home this term rather than City Hall, we have instituted a different way of approaching each measure. Prior to the session, the committee is given not only a draft from the deputy city attorney, but all the materials and information that apply. I then have assigned each committee member a measure who then serves as its lead for the writing and discussion of that digest draft, which is then presented to the committee. After a thorough discussion, we arrive at a draft. We then solicit public comment from interested parties before coming to an approved draft. As you can see, we do not easily arrive at a final consensus without a great deal of discussion and feedback. However, each approved digest also then becomes eligible for reconsideration upon appeal, and that is why we're here today. We have approved 3 measures eligible for reconsideration, and each has at least one request. Today's process is that we discuss the written reconsiderations which were filed with the Department of Elections and determine any changes that we believe need to be made. When we are finished, we then open the floor for public comment, and you tell us what changes you approve of or what changes you do not. If asking for more changes, we ask that you give us specifics to consider. Once public comment is finished, we then determine whether there is any new information and/or changes that need to be discussed. Once we arrive at a final consensus, we take a vote, and that vote is final. The measure will appear as read in the voter information pamphlet. For those watching and listening to us today, we will take these reconsiderations for measures in order. The first will be the parcel tax, second will be the executive compensation tax, and the third will be police staffing. I am announcing that in order so that you will be aware of where your measure of interest is on the agenda and when it will be discussed. Our very first one this morning is the parcel tax. And we have received 2 reconsiderations. The one asks us in the proposal to change the word from change to lower the tax rate, from change the tax rate to lower the tax rate in the proposal. And both of them have asked for a reconsideration, especially on the wording for the 2018 school partial tax has been challenged in court, and the money collected through this tax may or may not be available, is what we have said. And there are 2 different concepts. One says the funds are not available to the school district, and the other one says the money has not been used. You have heard and seen some of the requests. We'll have a reading, I think, is necessary for the public. Peter?
All right. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right.
Final.
The way it is now, San Francisco Unified School District parens educates about 54,000 students a year and employs about 6,900 teachers. In June 2018, a majority of San Francisco voters approved an annual parcel tax to provide funding to the school district. 2018 school parcel tax parens. As of July 1st, 2020, this tax rate is $320 per parcel of taxable property with an adjustment for inflation each year. The 2018 school parcel tax expires on June 30th, 2038. The school district can use the money collected through this tax to bullet, increase salaries and benefits for teachers and other school district employees, bullet, increase staffing and funding at high-needs schools and community schools, bullet, provide professional development, bullet, invest in technology, including digital learning, and bullet, fund public charter schools. People age 65 or older before July 1st of the tax year are exempt from this tax if they own an interest in the property being taxed and if the property is where they live most of the time. The 2018 school parcel tax has been challenged in court, and the money collected through this tax may or may not be available to the school district. The proposal. Proposition blank would replace the 2018 school parcel tax, which was approved by a majority of voters, with a new parcel tax that needs the approval of 2/3 of voters. Beginning on July 1st, 2021, Proposition blank would change the tax rate to $288 per parcel of taxable property. This tax would be adjusted for inflation each year and would expire on June 30th, 2038. People age 65 or older before July 1st of the tax year would be exempt from this tax if they own an interest in the property being taxed and if the property is where they live most of the time. The school district could use the money collected through this tax for the same purposes as the 2018 school parcel tax. A yes vote means if you vote yes, beginning on July 1st, 2021, you want the city to replace the 2018 school parcel tax with a new tax that changes the annual tax rate from $320 per parcel to $288 per parcel, adjusted for inflation each year and with an exemption for people age 65 or older. A no vote means if you vote no, you do not want to make this change.
You've heard the major changes asked. The others are stylistic and readability. For instance, annual instead of each year, through instead of for. Lauren, you were the lead on this. We're going to let you make your comments. I'm sure you've gone through it thoroughly.
Yeah, so just addressing the first one that you raised, Betty, changing the word to lower.
I'm having trouble hearing Laura.
Hi, is anyone else having trouble hearing me?
It's a little quiet.
Be loud.
Yeah, you're pretty quiet, Lauren.
Okay, I will be louder and I will.
I think it's your microphone input level.
Thank you. I will put on my headphones. Just give me one moment.
It's one of those mornings for technical glitches.
See, Peter, this is what I get for joking that I was having no technical difficulties.
No, it's still not great.
Okay. Well, I think then someone else should talk while I try to resolve this issue. It's going to take a minute or two.
Well, go ahead and see if we can. Peter, can you figure it out?
I can ask Val to work with Lauren if that would be helpful.
Okay, all right. Then Scott, do you have some comments that we can consider while we're waiting for Lauren? Now I can't hear you.
That's because my microphone was muted. Sorry.
That's okay. I can appreciate all of that. Thank you.
So I'm indifferent, in all honesty, about changing the yes vote to indicate that the direction of the change is a decrease rather than merely stating that it changes. I'm indifferent about that. I think that it's written well in both ways. We spent a lot of time talking about the notion of the court challenge to the school parcel tax. And we did sort of really consider, as part of that, the recommendations that have been made for reconsideration, in that the actual mechanism we decided is that the city has not released the funds. And because that, we didn't feel it would be appropriate to say the school district hasn't spent the funds or the funds haven't been spent. And that we had a large discussion about the fact that the funds are still there pending the outcome of the legislation. And that if the legislation is upheld, then the funds can be spent or distributed, I should say. And so I think we spent a lot of time on that sentence, and I'm not persuaded that the requested changes are important. So I'm indifferent about lower, and I would leave our phrase on the school parcel tax as it is.
Michelle, your thoughts? All right, Lauren, if you,
Yeah, I was just thinking. Yeah, I don't really think that we need to point out what I think is pretty clear, that this is being lowered, because if anyone can see numbers, I mean, it goes from what, 300 something to 200 something. I guess if you want to call it out there, I guess it would be when there was a possibility that it might go up, which is not true here. As for the collecting, spending, who gets what when, basically what is happening is that these funds are, and this is not an 8th grade word, are held in abeyance. So they're kind of like, well, that's what's going on, but no 8th grade person
We're not through that one.
understand that.
yeah.
And so it's, yeah, I like what we have here. I think that if you try to sort of go into the ins and outs and details, it'll just confuse things.
Okay, well, Lauren, can we hear you now?
Can you hear me? Is this better?
Yay.
Okay, great. For some reason, things on me today. Don't know why. To the point of the lower, I believe last week, my original draft, I had actually used the word decrease, and Janica chimed in and said that saying decrease, or in this case lower, is not necessarily always accurate because of how the tax rate is eventually figured out. And some people might actually see something go up, especially because the parking space exemption for those 60 odd folks is going away. And Janica might be able to remind me of exactly what the concerns were last week when we had a similar idea.
So just to refresh, the tax rate itself is in fact lowering, that's correct, but the tax, the actual number, may not lower for some people. And so it could be highly misleading for the yes vote to say lowers the tax rate, because from a quick read, someone could deduce that their taxes are going to go down, and that is not the case in all instances.
Right, okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that to use the word lower could be potentially confusing without, us going through and really making sure that the difference between tax and tax rate is super clear here, and I just would like to avoid the potential for confusion.
And how do you feel about the 2018 school parcel tax has been challenged in court, and we have two different suggestions? Should you think they either one or
the suggestion from Danielle Baldacci is it's closer to what I actually had originally, and so I when I first looked at it, I said that's a familiar feeling, and that is the structure. That's at least the structure or the idea that I had originally used, and I liked that. The may or may not. I understand where that came from, but I do not mind the suggestion, and I think it is written in a more straightforward way. So I would be okay with taking that suggestion. I think it's a slight improvement for voters.
how does the rest of the committee feel?
Which one would that be? What?
No, I would not change the sentence. And again,
It's
relitigate it.
Michelle, to answer your question, the suggestion is the 2018 school parcel tax has been challenged in court, and the funds are not available to the school district.
and the change you are considering is Lauren?
The change I'm considering is what I just read, that the money
Not available.
and the funds are not available to the school district. It's the may or may not. I mean, the funds are not currently. It's the way it is now. The funds are not currently available to the school district. You know, depending on the court thing.
I think
But the current state, which is the way it is now, we're not predicting the future here. But I understand why the rest of the committee came up with the sentence on the screen.
Yeah, but couldn't that change between now and when this is both voted on?
are we expecting a ruling? Jenica?
Yeah.
Jenica?
Oftentimes we are reluctant to iterate whatever the current state of the world is because we write these digests in July or June, and then by November it's unclear what has happened, right? In this particular case, the appeal is in the early stages. The city prevailed in litigation at the trial court level, and the matter is now on appeal at the Court of Appeal. Appeals typically can take up to 2 years to resolve. So it is unlikely that the state of the litigation will change between now and November, just given the posture of this particular case.
But it might.
It's not implausible. I mean, there's nothing to stop the court from turning around and issuing a decision quickly, but my understanding is that the matter has not even been fully briefed yet before the Court of Appeal. They haven't scheduled a hearing on the matter, and those steps would need to happen first before the court issued a decision.
Yeah, but couldn't the whole thing be dropped, or I don't know? It's just...
Yeah, theoretically, the parties could settle. There are things that could happen that could change the course of the litigation, which would then potentially, if that changed, could render the statement inaccurate.
Yeah, I mean,
so the current version is encompassing sort of all potential possibilities.
If somebody were writing a news story about this, you wouldn't make any absolute statements or something like that. You would have to attribute. So
yes, and that is consistent with the past practice of this committee, is to not forecast what will happen between now and November.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah. So
okay, Janica, thank you. That helps me. So I feel like the version we have does what we need it to do, even though that's a little confusing. You know, it's not the ideal situation to have to do that. So I'm fine with it as it is.
So
call me paranoid.
So we're fine with the digest as originally written?
Yeah, it'll work.
Lauren, we've made no changes, correct?
Yeah, I'm looking at the rest of the changes that are suggested, and they're style choices for me, and I don't see them as necessarily improving anything that is lacking. So I'm fine with it as it is.
Well, we've read the digest, we've discussed it, but we've not changed anything. So I don't think we need a further reading. Does anyone else disagree? If not, we open the floor to public comment, and I see we have one member, Mr. Baldacci is on the line.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for discussing this. This conversation is really enlightening, and I know this is difficult, and it's hard to convey this information without putting some kind of political bent. I will say the may or may not does confuse things, in my opinion, which is why I submitted that revision. This measure wouldn't exist if the funds were available and seeks to fully replace the 2018 tax, which is why I believed it was, we have to make reference and explain the current case in court at the moment, but in any way indicating that the school district has access to these funds or will in the near future is incorrect. And I get that there is some legal covering that needs to happen, which is why I just stated that the funds are not available to the school district as a kind of, stop, because they are not. I get that there's this like small chance, but leaving a may or may not, however you want to frame it, is confusing in my opinion. But I do appreciate that this is difficult, and thank you for your work.
Thank you very much. And I have no name, so I have to assume it's David.
Can you hear me now?
Yep. Yes.
Good morning, David Pilpel. I agree with the previous speaker that the phraseology may or may not be available is confusing and not particularly helpful. I think something along the lines of either what I suggested or what was suggested, that it's not available at this time, that's not available to the school district, it's just not available right now, I think is both true, and more helpful than may or may not. Well, lots of things may or may not be. Could we also call up the suggestions that I made, because there were a couple that I wanted to call to your attention? Thank you. And do we have the marked revisions version?
Yes, we do.
Great, thank you. Okay, so in the way it is now, I would add because San Francisco Unified School District is actually a separate entity. I just think the is a helpful word there. I suggested moving the parenthetical for the 2018 tax up because I think it's a better place for it. I was trying to not use the word funds or funding where possible, and so I thought money was better, but I get that there are different ways to look at that. I thought annual saves a word rather than each year. The concept of a tax year wasn't explained, if you can go down a little bit, wasn't explained, and maybe that's a word that needs to be added to words you need to know. If there's some way to avoid use of the term tax year, that might be helpful. And I noted as I was going through and reading the thing, if you're 65 or older, you're not automatically exempt. You have to claim an exemption. There's a process for that. So I thought saying that people 65 or older are exempt is also a little misleading. Under the proposal, I suggested moving up the beginning on July 1, 2021, because that's actually what it does. It doesn't replace the new parcel tax immediately. The ordinance only takes effect July 1, 2021. Same suggestions throughout for annually and tax year, claim and exemption. Peter, can you go down a little bit? The school district would be able to, I think that was the first time I saw use of the word could, and I thought, using would more consistently would be useful. And then the other changes in the yes vote were just to conform to the style. That was the first time that the date was set at the beginning rather than later on. The structure has always been, if you vote yes, comma, you want something. Anyway, and it seemed like it was making a couple of changes, so that's why in the no vote, I suggested pluralizing it. Those are my suggestions. Perhaps you'll find at least some of them useful. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I will explain because I know you have made comment for consideration on the other measures, but the reason that we ask for them in writing is because that's what we consider when we look at it beforehand, and so we do not have a button or a gong, because we do not usually have each line by line and each request individually gone over. So we've all looked at it, and Lauren has looked at it specifically. So now we have a second look at it, but we're probably not going to take everything line by line in the next considerations, because we've already got them and they're online, and that's what we consider. And so we would appreciate not being having to relook at them again, but we will at this time for purposes of understanding and your concerns. Lauren, did you see anything in this, in what he had revisited that you thought should be considered?
Well, I just wanted to just address the suggestion to change it to claim an exemption. Whether or not someone claims an exemption, they are still exempt. They can choose to claim it or not. So I appreciate that. It's not, I think it's fine as is, and some of these suggestions we specifically addressed in our first drafting. So, for example, adding the word "the" before the school district, I very intentionally took that word out because the school district generally does not use the word "the" before its own name. So some of these are familiar already. So that's why I am not looking at them. And I do appreciate, sometimes efforts to replace words like funding with a simpler word like money. That's certainly something that I did in this draft. And, that's something we will always endeavor to do. I think as we have it written now is clear. And we will continue to look for opportunities in future drafts to come up with more natural language whenever possible. And then, the location of the date is again something we talked about the last time. So, I think that what we have on the screen in our draft is I am satisfied with.
And we're doing things a little differently this time because we did allow him to go through it, his piece by piece reconsiderations, although that's not basically the way we operate on reconsiderations. So at this moment, I see nobody else online. Is that correct, Peter?
Yep, I don't see anyone else. It's *3 if you want to call in.
Then public comment is closed. And is there any other further discussion? I hope we don't have to do that again. I hope that David understands the procedures now of how this committee works. So if there's no other discussion from the committee, then I call for a final reading.
The way it is now, San Francisco Unified School District Friends educates about 54,000 students a year and employs about 6,900 teachers. On June 2018, a majority of San Francisco voters approved an annual parcel tax to provide funding to the school district 2018 school parcel tax parens. As of July 1st, 2020, this tax rate is $320 per parcel of taxable property with an adjustment for inflation each year. The 2018 school parcel tax expires on June 30, 2038. The school district can use the money collected through this tax to, bullet, increase salaries and benefits for teachers and other school district employees, bullet, increase staffing and funding at high-need schools and community schools, bullet, provide professional development, bullet, invest in technology, including digital learning, and bullet, fund public charter schools. People age 65 or older before July 1st of the tax year are exempt from this tax if they own an interest in the property being taxed and if the property is where they live most of the time. The 2018 school parcel tax has been challenged in court, and the money collected through this tax may or may not be available to the school district. The proposal. Proposition blank would replace the 2018 school parcel tax, which was approved by a majority of the voters, with a new parcel tax that needs the approval of 2/3 of voters. Beginning on July 1st, 2021, Proposition blank would change the tax rate to $288 per parcel of taxable property. This tax would be adjusted for inflation each year and would expire on June 30th, 2038. People age 65 or older before July 1st of the tax year would be exempt from this tax if they own an interest in the property being taxed and if the property is where they live most of the time. The school district could use the money collected through this tax for the same purposes as the 2018 school parcel tax. A yes vote means if you vote yes, beginning on July 1st, 2021, you want the city to replace the 2018 school parcel tax with a new tax that changes the annual tax rate from $320 per parcel to $288 per parcel, adjusted for inflation each year and with an exemption for people age 65 or older. A no vote means if you vote no, you do not want to make this change.
I will say that sometimes this committee is pressed to make it easily readable and still fall within the legitimate legal interpretation. So if the committee has no other comments, then the chair entertains a motion to adopt.
I move we adopt the digest as final.
A second. All right, let's have a roll call. Scott Patterson,
Yes.
Michelle Anderson,
You muted, Michelle.
Oh, yeah. Yes?
yes, okay, thank you. Lauren,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. It is unanimous. The parcel tax for San Francisco Unified School Districts is final as read. The second item on the agenda is the executive pay. Michelle went over this quite carefully, and we had a great discussion on the one thing that everybody seems to discuss. The only style that I saw was they said that the rate that varies from rather than the rate is. But the biggest thing on the agenda is that the supervisor is very concerned that we have the sentence on the small business. So Michelle, it's up to you. What's your thinking? You wrote this. You read all the pages of comments, so
Can you hear me?
we can.
Yes.
No, wait a minute. Just a second. Technical.
Betty, do we need to have a reading of this?
I suppose that would be a good idea. Peter?
Yep, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
The way it is now, the city collects a tax on gross receipts tax parens, from some businesses in San Francisco at a rate from 0.16% to 0.65% annually. Businesses with more than $1 billion in gross receipts, 1,000 employees nationwide, and administrative offices in San Francisco pay an administrative office tax parens, based on their payroll expense instead of their gross receipts. This tax rate is 1.4% of their payroll expense. State law limits the amount of revenue, including tax revenue, the city can spend each year. State law authorizes San Francisco voters to approve increases to this limit to last for 4 years. The proposal. Proposition blank would place an additional tax on some businesses in San Francisco when their highest paid managerial employee, top executive pay, parens, earns more than 100 times the median compensation paid to their employees in San Francisco. Employee pay, parens. Bullet. For a business that pays the gross receipts tax, if its top executive pay is more than 100 times employee pay, the business would pay an additional tax from 0.1% to 0.6% of its San Francisco gross receipts. Some small businesses would be exempt from this additional tax. Bullet. For a business that pays the administrative office tax, if its top executive pay is more than 100 times employee pay, the business would pay an additional tax from 0.4% to 2.4% of its San Francisco employee payroll expense. Its San Francisco payroll expense. Proposition blank would also increase the limit on the city's annual tax revenue spending by the amount of additional taxes collected under the proposed tax. The increased limit would last for 4 years. A yes vote means if you vote yes, you want to place an additional tax on some businesses in San Francisco when their highest paid managerial employee earns more than 100 times the median compensation paid to their employees in the city. A no vote means if you vote no, you do not want to make this change.
The first suggestions that we have from Mr. Pilpul is basically restructuring some of the sentences for readability. He wants to change revenue to money. He wants to, in the restructuring, just mention that varies. And he wants to change the statement, you want to place an additional tax, to you want to create a new tax on. So those are his changes, and pretty much we have the stylistic changes in front of us, although some of them also do help the readability or apply to the readability in his estimation. And then the other major and only one from the supervisor is that we discuss once more the small business statement and delete it. Michelle, are you back now with us? Michelle?
Yeah,
Michelle, you're muted.
Yeah, there are different views on this WebEx thing. So yeah, so can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not really on board with changes that are really stylistic, because there are so many ways to make this either more readable or less. And if we could be going around forever in terms of issues on styles. So, but the one that caught my eye in particular was adding the word varied. And I don't think that we need that, because, you know, if it's a change, it's sort of by definition of variation. So now, so does anyone have any other opinions on the bevy of stylistic suggestions?
No.
I mean, one could improve or whatever, but at this stage, I think that we should focus on things that will really affect the substance of the draft.
And
humble opinion.
And his idea of changing the lead sentence in both the proposal and the yes vote to would create a new tax rather than would replace, you do not consider at all, correct?
Create, you want to place an additional tax.
You know, we say you want to place an additional tax, and he would want to create a new tax.
I could, the suggestion being made, I don't agree that the characterizing this as a new tax is quite accurate for me. I think that is a little misleading. Perhaps our use of the word additional, it is placing a tax on. Yes, it's additional, but you know, aren't all taxes additional? But I don't see that being really all that big in impact. So,
well, I mean, it would be. I mean,
I remember our discussion was that we included the word additional because this tax is tied to other taxes that you pay. And so because it was not a standalone tax, we didn't feel that new was appropriate. And we added the word additional because of its relationship to these other things.
That's a very good point. Thank you, Scott.
So I think we've probably gone through pretty much the first reconsideration. Now we're looking at the supervisors, which wants us to address the small business statement and delete it.
Okay. Okay, the first suggested amendment, small business. Okay, when I read over this several times, I guess that the question that arose for me was, is it true by definition that a small business would not pay a gross receipts tax? Is it by definition? Because later on, according to the administrative tax code, let's see, a small business enterprise, let's see, means the gross receipts does not exceed $1 million. So it seems to me that now that I've read the language of the tax code, that it seems, and I might be wrong, that by definition, a small business does not pay a gross receipts tax. True or false, Jenica? Is
I
there
mean,
a
I
situation
wouldn't.
where a small business would pay a gross receipts tax as a small business?
So I know this seems fussy, but I just wouldn't characterize it that way. It's not that small businesses don't pay. It's that if you are a small business with gross receipts that don't exceed X amount, then you are exempt from the gross receipts tax.
Okay. So could you be a small business that has gross receipts over whatever, $1 million and still be defined as a small business?
With 1,000
It wouldn't. It would be
employees.
irrelevant if you were. It would be irrelevant for the purposes of this measure because you're only. I believe that is not relevant. What is relevant is if you are a small business that does not pay gross receipts, then you are unlikely to be subject to this tax. Now, there were these very strange hypotheticals we walked through before with Scott regarding the pay ratios. And that's why we landed on some, is that there could be some strange scenario that is difficult for me to articulate on the fly.
Right.
Where the pay ratio could be such that you might still be subject. They're different measures, right? And I think there was reluctance from our tax attorneys to categorically authorize me to tell you that all small businesses as a group are exempt. They were reluctant for me to advise that language could be used, and so I'm continue to be reluctant to tell you that would be legally accurate.
So remember the mechanism here, right? You first have to have the executive pay 100-to-1 or greater wage differential. Then you may qualify for this tax, and you would have to pay the tax if you pay gross receipts tax or if you pay administrative office tax. So the mechanism is this two-step mechanism that Jenica was talking about. The other thing is I think we need to leave it small because, or some small, as we have it. There is an exception in the code for people that lease property, residential property. And that if you lease residential property in San Francisco and you make less than $1 million, you may be subject to the gross receipts tax, right? Yeah. So you see, for purposes of small business enterprise shall mean and include any person or combined group except for a lesser of residential real estate whose gross receipts. So I think that if we say small business as a whole, we are opening a can of worms because we have to say small business as defined in, this.
Correct. So thank you, Scott, for refreshing my memory. So the issue that was brought to my attention internally by my colleagues, and that what Supervisor Haney's letter is not addressing, is that the exemption to gross receipts is not exclusively based on your gross receipts amount. So it's not just based on, whether you have $1 million or more. You could, as Scott indicates, also be subject to certain exemptions that are not articulated here. And if we say just categorically small businesses, that's not accounting for those additional exemptions.
Yeah. I when in doubt, hedge.
Yeah, hedge. Yeah,
Well,
because there might, because I just didn't know whether by definition if we're
well, I'm having a hard time understanding how a small business has more than $1 billion in gross receipts and 1,000 employees.
well,
That's not the, but that's also not the only criteria.
Yeah.
So that scenario is highly unlikely, Betty. And if those were the only two criteria, then we would have an easier time wordsmithing some sort of exemption. But there are additional exemptions existing in our tax code related to the gross receipts tax that a technical small business could qualify under. Small business in the layman's concept of what small business is could qualify under, which is not. That's why we have hedged.
And here we go back again to what is readability for the voter is not always legally correct, and we're forced to walk a very fine line. So
now that I've heard the discussion, because I just didn't know if this were a blanket definition of small business, i.e. they are subject to gross receipts tax. But since there will always be exceptions and exemptions, I would keep the hedge in and just say some.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, just to be safe.
We haven't changed anything, correct, Michelle?
That's right. That is correct.
So I don't think we need another reading. We can open the floor now to public comment. I'm sure the supervisor who is online has much more that he would like to say about his concern. Supervisor Haney.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for letting me chat with you again. I do think this is very important, and I understand the sort of the legal perspective on it. I believe that when you say some small businesses would be exempt, it is incredibly misleading. It is suggesting that small businesses and some significant amount of them may pay this tax when they cannot pay this tax by definition. So if you want to be more careful and want to hedge, I would very strongly suggest and just recommend that you take that sentence out completely. I think people will read this and believe that some smaller businesses will pay this. As has just been recognized in the conversation, nobody could come up with a single actual example of a small business that would pay this. One of the main reasons for that is because of the floor that this sets with employee pay. So you have to make 100 times the employee pay, and minimum wage is $32,400. So that means that the lowest executive pay to be subject to the tax will be $3.24 million. That makes it, there are no small businesses that are at that level. And for the purposes of the gross receipts tax, it states very clearly that small business enterprises will not pay this tax. So even if you're not comfortable with saying no small businesses will pay this tax, by saying some small businesses will pay this tax without being able to come up with a single example, and particularly considering the wage floor that exists, it's remarkably misleading to voters to suggest to them that small businesses of some significant number would pay this when they simply cannot, by definition, in the gross receipts with the small business enterprise, and because of the level of disparity that would be needed and the minimum wage law, it isn't some small businesses that would pay this. And so I understand that the concern about hedging or being safe or not wanting to be completely black and white on saying none. And I respect that. I do think it's not accurate, but I respect not wanting to say that completely. then I would ask that you consider removing that sentence, because I think it will give the impression to voters that the example that you all gave, that you did not want to communicate to them, that your corner store that has 3 employees or whatever it is would be subject to this. It may give that impression, and I think that's incredibly and dangerously misleading to voters.
So can I just say that
Scott, let's hear all the comments, and then let's close it and let you talk, please, because I know I know what.
There's a serious fallacy we need to address.
Yes. Is there any other callers? If not, Peter, no more. No more's on my list. On yours?
I just see the supervisor, but yeah, I just see the supervisor.
Then the public comment is closed, and Scott, the floor is yours.
So I just want to address this argument that Supervisor Haney brings up, that the 100-to-1 ratio is so extreme that it would never apply to a small business. And so because of that, we should say that there is an exemption for small business. That's a fallacy of equivocation, because there are many, many large businesses who do not meet the 100-to-1 ratio as well. And so to say that that is only small businesses that fall into that is, I just have a very hard time buying that reasoning, and I reject it as a fallacy.
So the point though is that no small business, you'd have to have over $3 million in revenue in order to qualify. I'm not saying that all large businesses do, but it's a fallacy to say that any small business could possibly apply for, be required to pay this, because you'd have to have 100-to-1, which means that if your median revenue or median employee made $32,000, you'd have to have an employee that made $3.24 million. And no small business is of that level in terms of their size. And in fact, in the gross receipts law, a small business enterprise in terms of their total amount of revenue.
Unfortunately, we had closed the public comment, and Peter did not close it off. And if I allow that comment, then I have to allow other people and reopen. Would the committee like to further comment?
Well, I think the issue is, if I could just contextualize what the issue is, do we want to leave in the sentence that some small businesses would be exempt from this additional tax? We want to change it to removing the qualifier some, or do we want to eliminate that sentence completely from the digest? Am I right? Is that the decision we're facing right now?
That's exactly what we're faced with.
Yeah. I was thinking about this and, looking at the word some and just taking the writer's look at things and saying, well, maybe we could use the word most, maybe we could use the majority. And I think that there is a sense that this is never going to be accurate enough to represent full truth. We're trying to get to full truth with not a lot of words. And so perhaps striking this sentence is the reasonable thing to do here. If there is not language that we can agree gets the point across to voters well enough that they understand it. And, I think maybe changing the word to most or changing it to the majority might accomplish that. It kind of, some does have a small thing about it, but that's, that's one alternative, but striking it is also another choice.
Well, I would be nervous about saying most, because we didn't really know that for a fact. And there is a saying in the news biz, when in doubt, leave it out. so this may be one of these situations, because if we leave the sentence in, first of all, to have no qualifier would not be accurate. And then, of course, if we have a qualifier, most, so I would, now that I've thought about it, maybe we should just leave it out.
I'm a fan of leaving it out because the exemption for small business is not really an exemption to this necessarily, is if they're exempt to the one of the two trigger mechanisms that they don't pay. So either they're exempt because they don't have the ratio, or they're exempt because they don't pay gross receipts tax.
And that was my thinking originally, and we only put it in there because we were concerned that some small businesses might have a question. And I think what we've done by putting it in there is create more questions. I've played around with this myself. I agree with the committee that deleting it is probably the best way we can handle this.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else have anything to say? Any
Sounds
other
good.
comments? Then shall we have a final reading?
The way it is now, the city collects a tax on gross receipts tax parens, from some businesses in San Francisco at a rate from 0.16% to 0.65% annually. Businesses with more than $1 billion in gross receipts, 1,000 employees nationwide, and administrative offices in San Francisco pay an administrative office tax parens, based on their payroll expense instead of their gross receipts. This tax rate is 1.4% of their payroll expense. State law limits the amount of revenue, including tax revenue, the city can spend each year. State law authorizes San Francisco voters to approve increases to this limit to last for 4 years. The proposal, Proposition blank would place an additional tax on some businesses in San Francisco when their highest paid managerial employee, top executive pay, parens, earns at more than 100 times the median compensation paid to their employees in San Francisco, employee pay parens. Bullet, for a business that pays the gross receipts tax, if its top executive pay is more than 100 times employee pay, the business would pay an additional tax from 0.1% to 0.6% of its San Francisco gross receipts. For a business that pays the administrative office tax, if its top executive pay is more than 100 times employee pay, the business would pay an additional tax from 0.4% to 2.4% of its San Francisco payroll expense. Proposition blank would also increase the limit on the city's annual tax revenue spending by the amount of additional taxes collected under the proposed tax. The increased limit would last for 4 years. A yes vote means if you vote yes, you want to place an additional tax on some business in San Francisco when their highest paid managerial employee earns more than 100 times the median compensation paid to their employees. Do not want to make this change.
Are there any further comments from the committee? If not, the chair invites a motion to adopt.
I move we adopt.
Roll call, Scott Patterson.
Do we need a second, Betty?
Second.
Thank you. I'm not sure that we do with a roll call, but we'll cover all our bases. Okay, Scott Patterson, that's fine. Scott,
yes, I approve.
Michelle Anderson,
Yes.
Laura Jordan.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. The vote is unanimous, and the business tax for top executives is final. I will like to say for the record that I'm sorry we did not have to take into consideration the second comment from the supervisor, but the public comment was closed, and we had discussed that, and his comments anyway were already in the comments that he had presented to us in writing. So we were discussing that. That was our piece finalize, and we did that. And we're sorry we didn't get the supervisor's final comments before the public comment was closed, but we did close the public comment. So the third item on the agenda is in fact the big one, and we got 20 reconsiderations for public staffing, and 17 of them were exactly alike. It's obvious to all of us that most people are unhappy with the yes vote, and they want inclusion of the process in the yes vote. That also was involved with Mr. Plunkett's from the Bar Association, who has given his complete thinking of how that should read, as well as Supervisor Yees, who's also wants more inclusion, not only the yes vote, but as Mr. Plunkett in the proposal as well. We did have some style changes. It was considered that we take, when we discussed this before, but maybe we want to revisit from full sworn to full duty officers or full duty sworn officers. There was some restructuring of the sentences for readability purposes, which we have. But mostly it's very obvious that people want us to include the process following the replacement of the draft. So, Scott, this was yours. Would you like to comment on all of our many reconsiderations?
Well, it's changed significantly from my original draft, but I'll be glad to go first to address the committee's draft. And I really do think it boils down to whether or not we want to, whether or not it's important to tell the voter in the yes vote that there is a mechanism that is created by this to evaluate staffing of the police department. And it seems that, that seems to be the issue. How we say that is something we can discuss. I think mainly before we talk about how to say it, we need to decide why we might say that. On terms of the full duty, we kind of went all over that. Full duty is a term of professional practice in this situation, and so it is regrettably the appropriate term. I think that we have added full duty sworn police officer to the words you need to know, and I think that should address that. So that's where I'm at. I think that if I were to ask for committee feedback, I'd ask about the adding the mechanism. I honestly would leave it out unless we made it very brief, because I don't want to repeat the entire proposal in the yes vote.
Okay. All right. Now we've heard Scott's considerations on the measure as we passed it. Let's have a reading for those who are listening and watching online, and then we can discuss the major concern of the voters and Scott's conception that it's probably not needed unless we want to go into a more easily adopted verbiage. Peter?
The way it is now, in 1994, San Francisco voters approved a change to the city charter parens, that requires the San Francisco Police Department parens, Bullet, to have at least 1,971 full-duty sworn police officers, and Bullet, to maintain a minimum number of fully sworn police officers for neighborhood policing and patrol. Among its duties, the San Francisco Police Commission parens, oversees the budget and staffing of the police department. The proposal. Proposition blank is a charter amendment that would remove the requirements that the police department maintain a minimum number of full-duty sworn police officers and a minimum number of full-duty sworn police officers for neighborhood policing and patrol, and replace it with regular evaluations of police staffing levels. Under Proposition blank, the Chief of Police would provide a report to the Police Commission that evaluates the current number of full-duty sworn police officers and the number of officers recommended in the future. The Police Commission would hold a public hearing on the report. A yes vote means if you vote yes, you want to remove the city charter requirements that the San Francisco Police Department maintain a minimum of 1,971 full-duty sworn police officers and a minimum number of full-duty sworn police officers for neighborhood policing and patrol. A no vote means if you vote no, you do not want to make these changes.
We've heard as read, we've heard that Scott says he would prefer to not have an extension of to include the process unless it's short and reasonable and can be included in both the proposal and the yes vote. That has been the concern of both Mr. Plunkett and Supervisor Yee, that it be included in both the proposal and the yes vote. The 17 suggestions that we got that were almost identical, in fact, they were identical, were the explaining the process in only the yes vote. So I think that's what we need to discuss at the moment. Lauren, do you have a comment or two?
Yeah, Scott said something I agree with. If we add it, I'd like to make sure that we add something that is straightforward and concise. We do have an option already in our proposal. So at the end of the first paragraph, we do say, and replace it with regular evaluations of police staffing levels. So we could add that to the yes vote. And, there are lots of suggestions of different ways we could phrase that. But, we do have a version, and I think we could add that, and that might get to the point.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Although it would make the yes vote an extremely long sentence, but just as long as it's, because here you have in the yes vote, you have a statement about removing these requirements, and then it may rise to the mind voter. Okay, so what is it going to be replaced with? Nothing, or, and then we could go back up to the proposal. Excellent suggestion, and just take that language and repeat it in the yes vote. So the voter would say, okay, so the old way is gone and this is the new.
I understand their concern because we've said you want to remove, and then we've never said what it's going to replace in the yes vote. And for those who only look at the yes vote, we're saying you want to remove these requirements, but we haven't told them what's going to happen from that, which is part of the legislation. So I agree that perhaps Lauren has a valid argument with just by saying just bring down what we said in the proposal and replace it with regular evaluations of police staffing levels.
So I also, one of the things I'm seeing in some of this feedback is that the minimums of 1,971 and then the minimum of neighborhood policing and patrol, the neighborhood policing and patrol is actually inclusive within that 1,900 number. That seems to be what a lot of the requests for reconsideration are expressing, maybe not so explicitly, but that's what I'm seeing in some of their rewrites. So there might be an opportunity in the yes vote to shorten it by taking out the part about neighborhood policing and patrol. Scott, you know, this might be for Andrew, that if that's not accurate, that it's the neighborhood policing is inclusive within the 1,900, then, you know, we should leave it. But if it is inclusive, we could take it out there to further shorten.
My comment is it necessary, since we now we're now saying remove and replace? Is that minimum number of full duty sworn officers for neighborhood policing. Is that as necessary as we had considered it before? Scott, it's up to you to
I appreciate that, Betty, but let me just say that in the ordinance, or the charter amendment, I guess it is, that it does explicitly remove the requirement for a fixed number of officers assigned to the particular duty of neighborhood policing and patrol. You're right that it's a proportion of the 1971, right? But it does remove it. And so I would call it out as a particular feature of this charter amendment.
Okay. Michelle?
Could we put it this way? Let's see. Going now, looking at the yes vote, this is just on the fly. Maintain a minimum of 1,971 full duty sworn police officers, including those who those in the neighborhood policing and patrol, or something like that.
Yeah, Michelle, I was thinking of something similar.
Yeah, something like that, to make it part of a subset of the whole. And so,
Well, if the
that
17
isn't the case.
the 17 requests that we got that were like, their replacement says, and replace it with a regular process for establishing the police department's appropriate staffing level.
Well,
Yeah, Betty, some of that is, we've already discussed in our previous session. We had the word process, we decided we didn't like it, we replaced it with regular evaluations.
That's true, but we have to discuss, we at least have to address it for all those people who talked about the process, asked us to talk about the process.
Okay.
yeah, fair enough.
There is a whole subtext that we've chosen not to get into here, and that is the replacement of full duty sworn officers, or full duty sworn officers with civilian personnel, and that's a piece of this as well, and I don't want to open that door here.
Well, I don't think anybody else opened it either, so.
Okay. But that's why I think, for example, we shouldn't say and a minimum number of officers for neighborhood policing and patrol, to shorten it, because that there may actually be an increase in the number of officers doing neighborhood policing and patrol. They just won't be full duty sworn police officers.
So you would
really hinges on that concept of full duty sworn officer.
So you would leave it in or take it out?
I would. What is written in the yes vote now is factually accurate.
And you would, all right.
I would leave it in. I would not change it.
And all right, and we've moved down from the proposal and replace it with regular evaluations of police staffing levels. And you have a thumbs up, okay?
I'm good with that change.
Any other comments as we look through all of these?
Actually, Bet, if you don't mind, if I could just,
Of course,
very
Andrew.
minor issue. Should, in terms of the additional phrases that we've added about replacing, should we say replace them since there's multiple requirements, or is it appropriate?
Yeah, requirements is plural, so it would
Replace
be them. I see Michelle is nodding along. Michelle, you're muted just in case you're talking.
No, I'm just nodding silently, but yeah, that's a good suggestion.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So you've got that change. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Any others, Andrew, that you caught?
No, it's just a very minor suggestion. That was it. Thank you, Betty.
All right. So let's have a reading as to what including our changes. Peter? And then we can open the floor to public comment. So.
The way it is now. In 1994, San Francisco voters approved a change to the city charter that requires the San Francisco. Someone's phone is here. Let's reread that. The way it is now. In 1994, San Francisco voters approved a change to the city charter that requires the San Francisco Police Department Bullet, to have at least 1,971 full-duty sworn police officers, and Bullet, to maintain a minimum number of full-duty sworn police officers for neighborhood policing and patrol. Among its duties, the San Francisco Police Commission oversees the budget and staffing of the police department. The proposal. Proposition blank is a charter amendment that would remove the requirements that the police department maintain a minimum number of full-duty sworn police officers and a minimum number of full-duty sworn police officers for neighborhood policing and patrol, and replace them with regular evaluations of police staffing levels. Under Proposition blank, the chief of police would provide a report to the police commission that evaluates the current number of full-duty sworn police officers and the number of officers recommended in the future. The police commission would hold a public hearing on the report. A yes vote means if you vote yes, you want to remove the city charter requirements that the San Francisco Police Department maintain a minimum of 1,971 full-duty sworn police officers and a minimum number of full-duty sworn police officers for neighborhood policing and patrol, and replace them with regular evaluations of police staffing levels. A no vote means if you vote no, you do not want to make these changes.
All right, anything from the committee? If not, let's open the floor to public comment. I see we have at least 4 on the line. The first one looks like it's David.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, David Pilpel again. First of all, I'm frustrated. I had walked away from the screen for a moment on the last measure and hit *3 to raise my hand in the queue, and that apparently didn't work on the phone when you're using the phone for audio with a computer screen. So I ran back to the computer and raised my hand, and by the time I did that, you had already closed public comment. So I wanted the opportunity to speak on the last measure and was frustrated that I wasn't able to do so. And I think that's highly unfair. I wanted to speak to the suggestions that I had, and I would ask you to reopen that so that I can comment. I did attempt to do so, and there are functionality issues between the computer and the phone. If we're still speaking to the police staffing issue, thank you, Peter, for pulling that up. Let me walk through my suggestions. I was trying to save words in a couple of places. That's why I suggested city instead of San Francisco. The other bulleted lists that I've seen throughout on these measures have a verb right after the bullet, and because you have 2 in both cases, I think it would be pretty easy to move the 2 just before the colon and have the be, have, and maintain. The first paragraph is just about whatever, being consistent, and I thought require regular evaluations, but replace it is fine. Require regular evaluations instead, I thought is fewer words, but if you want to leave it with, replace it with, I guess that's fine too. In the yes vote, I think you just did what I was suggesting at the end to duplicate the language there, that there would be some process. And I think that's a fair and fine summary of the process. The have and maintain, I guess these aren't wedding vows, but it sounds pretty close. Those are my comments on this. And again, I would like the opportunity to revisit the last measure. I did not have an opportunity to speak on that. Thank you.
Caller number 2, which is caller number 8.
Good morning, committee members. My name is Alexander Post. I'm a Deputy State Public Defender at the Office of the State Public Defender, and submitted one of the comments about adding the evaluation of police staffing levels. I want to thank the committee for their work overall. I know this is not easy to do in regular time, so obviously not easy to do over WebEx either. I think the suggestion made is well taken. Frankly, it's maybe a little better than mine in that it's a little more concise. Just making sure, because that is a substantial part of the charter amendment, it covers over a page of section 4.27, the process. I think it's important to include it in the yes section. I will say part of the discussion about whether or not to include the neighborhood policing part, if we do want to shorten this up a bit, I think you would be fine getting rid of that, because if you do look at section 4.27, that minimum for the neighborhood policing really is a subset of the overall minimum. And so I think, keeping it in the digest makes sense, but if you want to subsume it in there and not have it in the yes vote, I don't think that would be misleading at all. So if you wanted it to just say, if you vote yes, you want to remove the city charter requirements that the San Francisco Police Department maintain a minimum of 1,971 full duty sworn police officers and replace it with a regular evaluation of police staffing levels, I think that would be perfectly fine. Regardless, I think that this change at least is well taken, and thank you for considering our comments.
Thank you, Mr. Post. Is Caitlin the next one then?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for allowing me to speak with you again today. Thank you for reviewing the comments from everyone who wrote and requested reconsideration of this measure, including Supervisor Yee, who I'm here representing. Want to be clear, the feedback from everyone who wrote in around this measure, including Supervisor Yee, really was ensure that the emphasis of this measure is placed on the new process to regularly evaluate police staffing levels, as opposed to having a set mandatory minimum. As the previous commenter mentioned, that 1,971 full duty sworn police officers does include the other mandatory minimum to maintain the 1993-1994 level of sworn officers for neighborhood policing and patrol. I agree with his comments. I think that it could be left in the way it is now, or even shortened as we proposed into one sentence as opposed to bulleted points, as I think that this places too much emphasis on these two minimums as if they're separate when really they're one and the same, and that mandatory minimum for neighborhood policing and patrol is contained within that total number 1,971. I would also agree that instead of having that subset, neighborhood policing and patrol, appear in all three sections, the way it is now, the proposal and a yes vote means, I think that it could be left out of the yes vote, appear in one or both of the previous sections, but it would not be inaccurate to leave that out from the yes vote, and I think would be helpful to place more emphasis on the real focus of this measure, which is placing a new process to regularly evaluate staffing levels. I think I very much understand the conversations from the committee about weighing accuracy and simplification. I think for this current draft as it is, I think that there's been a heavier weighting of accuracy when it comes to the mandatory minimums that currently exist over simplification. And I think when it comes to the process, we've weighted simplification over accuracy in some places. I think that should be reversed because the real focus of this measure is to put in place a new process that keeps these numbers current and is an informed, data-driven, comprehensive review of staffing levels on an ongoing basis. Thank you for hearing my comments. Thank you for including the regular evaluations in the yes vote means, and appreciate all of your work on this. I know it is challenging especially under these times. So thank you.
And thank you for calling in. Is there anyone else on the queue that I haven't addressed?
If you're calling it up, here we go.
Okay, caller 10. Caller 10, you're on. You're live.
Hi. Hello. Hi. My name is Mimi Klausner. I'm a member of the DSA Justice Committee, and I've lived in San Francisco for 35 years. And I just want to say what a pleasure it is to have a public body respond to input from the public and actually change their actions. Unfortunately, that's really rare. And I just want to give you a lot of credit for doing that and just being open-minded. So I want to thank you for your work, and that's about it. Okay, bye.
We always appreciate phone calls like that one. And thank you for making the comment. We, as you know, we get lots of other ones that don't show their appreciation quite as much. All right, here we go. I hesitate to close public comment till I'm sure we have everyone. Peter, you want to ask people that if there's anybody else that wants on, will you please press 3?
Star 3 if you're calling in, or the little raise hand button in the bottom right if you're on WebEx.
I want to give everybody enough time this time, so there's no confusion. All right, there I see no more on the queue, so public comment is closed. We're going to primarily look at, in my estimation, whether or not we need to include a minimum number of full-duty sworn police officers for neighborhood policing in the yes vote. For me, I would take it out, but leave it in the way it is now, because that sets what actually is happening. We're not changing that. We're maintaining that the minimum of number of 971 full-duty sworn police officers. So for the sake of simplicity and understanding, I would take that out. Because we're saying remove and replace. That's my consideration. I'm open to the rest of the committee for comment.
Well, I just want to correct Betty that they are removing the proportion of full duty sworn officers assigned to that purpose as part of this. So it's not that it's all inclusive of the 1971. Right, because so that there is a change there.
There's
the charter amendment does three things, I guess now, is that it says we're going to remove the minimum number of officers. We're going to remove the requirement that there's a minimum number of officers assigned to a particular duty, and we're going to replace it with the process of the assessment from the chief and the police commission.
okay. I still question whether it's actually needed in the yes vote.
Okay.
We've said it in the proposal, and I'm wondering if the yes vote, by taking out of the yes vote, dilutes what's happening, or just simplifies it for
Peter,
better.
take it out. Can you take it out, Peter, and let us see it, please?
That would definitely help. Yeah.
Then we need to change the them to it.
Correct. I like it. I like the yes vote without.
I would, if we do that, I would certainly leave it in the proposal, but I'm not of the opinion that it's absolutely that important in the yes vote, because we have included it in the proposal. Anybody else? Lauren, you agree with?
Betty, I agree with what you're saying, and I agree with what's on the screen.
Okay, Michelle?
I think it's yeah, I prefer it without the extra words. But now, what does it refer back to? To replace it? I mean,
The
what?
requirement, Michelle. It equals the
Well, we don't
requirement.
say- No, this is in the yes vote.
Yeah.
You want to? All right. The chart. Okay, and replace it. Yeah. But that's really, it's so far down.
Well, you could say replace the requirement.
No. Yeah. Okay. All right.
You could say add a new requirement.
Yeah, because here you have to remove the city charter requirement, and then you have all these words. The San Francisco Police Department maintain a minimum of blah blah blah, and replace it. Okay. Replace.
But I think we have to leave replace because it's not an addenda.
Do you think that it's clear what it refers to, or is it just me?
Could we instead say create a new requirement?
I don't like creative.
No, I think replace.
I'm offering options.
Replace was throughout the letters from people.
Replace this requirement with regular. I mean, maybe it might be good to repeat it just to make sure that it's absolutely crystal clear.
I agree with Michelle that it is confusing.
That's fine.
Yeah, because there's just too many words between city charter requirement and.
Okay, that makes sense. And, we're replacing it with regular evaluations of policing staff levels. I think that covers the intent of the measure. Does anybody else?
I disagree, but okay.
So you would leave it in, correct? You would leave in the maintaining.
I would, but I'm not gonna. I don't believe it's so important that I want to rehash it again.
Okay.
If this is what the committee wants, we should do this.
Yeah, I'm looking at it in terms of the average voter and what they're going to understand without all the extras of. I realize what you're saying, Scott, is accurate.
Well, Betty, I'll just put it out there. You now have a yes vote that is different than the proposal. And so the yes vote says we're going to replace this one requirement with this new mechanism. And in the proposal, we're saying you're going to replace these two things with the new mechanism. And to me, that's more confusing. I would read this, if I read the whole thing, I'd say, wait, I thought they were doing two things. That's where I'm at.
I see what you're saying. Comments from Michelle and Lauren?
We don't always include everything in the yes vote, so I think this is what I see on the screen works for me.
Okay. And Michelle?
Well, I hate to sound mundane, but it looks okay as it is.
All right. If we have no other comments, then I would like the measure to be read.
The way it is now, in 1994, San Francisco voters approved a change to the city charter parens, that requires the San Francisco Police Department parens, Bullet, to have at least 1,971 full-duty sworn police officers, and Bullet, to maintain a minimum number of full-duty sworn police officers for neighborhood policing and patrol. Among its duties, the San Francisco Police Commission parens, oversees the budget and staffing of the police department. The proposal. Proposition blank is a charter amendment that would remove the requirements that the police department maintain a minimum number of full-duty sworn police officers and a minimum number of full-duty sworn police officers for neighborhood policing and patrol, and replace them with regular evaluations of police staffing levels. Under Proposition blank, the chief of police would provide a report to the police commission that evaluates the current number of full-duty sworn police officers and the number of officers recommended in the future. The police commission would hold a public hearing on the report. A yes vote means if you vote yes, you want to remove the city charter requirement that the San Francisco Police Department maintain a minimum of 1,971 full-duty sworn police officers and replace the requirement with regular evaluations of police staffing levels. A no vote means if you vote no, you do not want to make these changes.
Any further comment from the committee? If not, the chair entertains a motion to adopt.
I move we adopt the digest as final.
I second the motion.
Scott Patterson,
Nay.
Michelle Anderson,
Yes.
Lauren Girardin,
Yes.
Betty Packard, yes. So it is a 3-1 decision, and the ballot measure is final as read. Now we have to, we have the option to open the floor to public comment from the measure before, because one of our callers did not get a response to his trying to get online. Do I hear a motion to open the floor to public to reopen the discussion for the previous measure?
I move to open public comment to the previous measure.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All right, then shall we listen to, I'm not sure, then do we, Andrew, does that void then the decision that we made before?
Well, yeah, I mean, there is still a motion on the floor. So I assume that you would take a roll call vote on the motion.
All right. Okay, there is a motion on the floor to open the public comment. Open the floor to public comment on the issue before. The chair votes no. Scott Patterson,
Yes.
Michelle Anderson,
Yes.
Lauren Girardin.
Yes.
All right, now what's the procedure, Andrew?
We would simply reopen public comment on the prior digest.
But does that void what we've done then?
Nope.
Nope. All right, so
Unless you hear something that changes your mind, of course.
all right. All right, so we open the floor to public comment on the previous measure, which was the CEO tax. David?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this. If I can just speak briefly, you don't have to take any of my comments, but I just wanted to explain them briefly. I thought at a rate from 0.016 to 0.065 without some qualifier that said that it varies or maybe that it ranges is confusing and perhaps misleading. And I thought saying that a rate from something to something annually doesn't say a rate compared to what. It's a rate of, or a percentage of their San Francisco gross receipts, depending on the type of business. So I thought that would make it more clear to the reader. And the second graph just moves up or makes more clear that it's those businesses that do not pay the gross receipts tax pay the administrative office tax if they so qualify. And I think it says it with fewer words. In the third graph, again, the issue of money, funds, revenue, was trying to make it simpler And it's not that that state law allows voters to increase the limit for 4 years. It's for up to 4 years. So I think that's slightly more accurate. Unfortunately, it adds 2 words. The next graph is not as important, but just where you refer to top executive pay as a concept, I think the parallel is median employee pay and not just employee pay. So I was trying to draw a parallel there. The two big bullets there are where I really spent some time doing some surgery. I think the current structure for a business, if it does this, would pay is just convoluted and confusing. I don't know what that is, a compound, conjunctive, whatever. So I tried to reword it in a way that I thought reads better. And you took out the second sentence there in the first bullet about the small business exemption. That's fine. The rest of it, I think, is less important. I believe on the other tax measure, the parcel tax, no, not the parcel tax. The real property transfer tax, I think that included in the yes vote that it would increase the annual spending limit for 4 years. So I thought, just as you were including the summary of the key provisions in the for a yes vote, it would be good to do that consistently. And there are some other stylistic and language changes that are just trying to save words and be more concise and precise. Thank you.
David, if you will notice, we in our reconsiderations, we have not been taking the requests specifically, each request of each area of the measures, everybody's request. We've not taken every single request. We've looked at it as a whole. If you have rationales next time, we'd appreciate the rationales included so that it brings a more than a stylistic look to it and an understandable look to it, but a rationale that makes us look at it in even more complete look than we do. We've heard all. Now that the floor is open to public comment on this issue, we need to see if there's anyone else who has public comment. Hearing none, the floor is closed to public comment. Has the committee heard anything that they feel they need to add to the digest as read? If so, then we need to have another vote. If not, then the vote stands as taken before. Any committee comment?
I didn't hear anything that would change my opinion because, I mean, lots of these suggestions, I mean, they may have been good or whatever. They basically are questions of rewording style, etc. And there are infinite ways to express an idea, but I didn't see anything that would change the substance or point out an error. Yeah.
Then let's, just to be totally correct or legal or whatever, let's have another confirming vote that the measure as read and voted upon, we confirm our vote. Scott Patterson, yes.
Confirm, yes.
Michelle?
Confirm, yes.
And I confirm. So all four of us have reconfirmed the measure.
Betty, I didn't speak, but I am confirming yes.
Oh, I thought I heard you say yes. Maybe that was Michelle answering. All right.
Sorry,
so
I may have jumped ahead.
There you go. Thank you. So all four of us have reconfirmed our vote and the measure stands as read. Now is when we, as a group, look at the measures today and see if there were any further ones that we need to put on Peter's streaming list of words you need to know that we didn't put on last week.
Someone mentioned tax year. I cannot remember if that's on the list already, but I thought it was, but that was mentioned today, so that could be up for consideration.
Okay. Any others? Peter, will you put that on the list? We have a running list to consider next week. Yeah. Michelle?
No, I didn't. Tax year, I vaguely remember, but no, I didn't see any.
I thought last week we did a really good job of trying to simplify the language itself so that we didn't need excessive numbers of words you need to know. But we'll put this one on the list as the tax year. That is one that could be considered. I see no other from the committee, so now we need to open the floor to public comment on words you need to know. Since Peter, I see David is on the list, on the queue. David?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, there's some continuing technical issues. David Pilpel again. I think I suggested tax year, and I think that was the only new thing that jumped out at me. Thank you again for reopening public comment on the last item. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. All right, so is the tax year the only one we've had Peter add to our list? And is there any more public comment? If not, public comment on words you need to know is closed. Now is when we open the floor to discussion of any other informational materials for the voter information pamphlet. Seeing none, the public comment is closed. And I think we've had a good day. We had lots of considerations, and I thank this committee for its thoughtful consideration and explanation for the voters who were listening in and asking us for changes. I think the voter who called in and congratulated us on actually listening to the voters was an indication that we're doing something right. So hearing no other discussions, we are now adjourned until Monday.
Excuse me, Betty, did you take general public comment yet?
I did.
Oh, you did? Okay. I just wasn't sure.
I see David's on the line. David, were you having trouble getting online? I did close public comment, but
can you hear me now?
I'll open it up again at this point. Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, David.
Okay, I thought you were taking comment on the additional words because that was on the agenda, and I not think that was general public comment. They're two separate items. And
I did close that one and then open it to the public comment on matters not appearing on the agenda.
Okay. I'm too tired to argue. I've been up most of the night. I just wanted to be clear. I just wanted to be clear about 2 points right now. One is that you have not taken up the frequently asked questions, and if you can just suggest when that's coming up in a future session, that would be great. And two, I join with the previous speaker who appreciated your work. I too, despite everything else, I do appreciate your work, and I get that this is difficult and that we're operating under extraordinary times and all of that. So I do appreciate your time and consideration. Thank you.
Yes, we did have we did have agenda the originally we had the other the frequently asked questions on the agenda, but the new agenda, the updated agenda does not. So we will be looking at that next week, and so we appreciate your comments, David. Are there any further comments then? Now that we understand people have been having trouble getting on, I see we have 2 attendees and only one wants to make public comment. David has made his. Is there anyone else? Then public comment is closed. And This committee is now adjourned until Monday morning at 9:30. Thank you all.
All right. Bye-bye. Have a great weekend.
Yes, have a wonderful
Thank
week.
you. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Thanks to all
Bye.
of you for your work.